Today's daf we're going to be learning is Zevachim daf Gimel. Today's daf, this week's learning is sponsored by Tina Lamb in loving memory of her father, Mr. Mike Senders, Alav Shalom, Yitzchak Meir ben Harav Tzvi, Aryeh Esther Bela Anish Shloshim. Reaching the age of 101 was not only a personal milestone for my father, but also a testament to the fullness of his life. He used those years well, building Torah institutions, nurturing family, and living in intimacy with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yehi Zichro Baruch. Today's daf is sponsored by Lisa Malik and Adi Weiner in loving memory of Lisa's grandmother, Regina Post, Zichrono Livracha. Babi Gina was the one who insisted on her grandchildren going to the yeshiva of Flatbush and was especially proud of her two granddaughters who were Hebrew valedictorians. She would be so proud to know that one of her namesakes, Rivka Gottlieb, made Aliyah and that she now has 6 Israeli grandchildren and 3 Israeli great-grandchildren. May the memory of Rivka Bat Shmuel V'Chava be for a blessing. Okay, with that, we'll get started. Today, I'm going to do something a little different. Hope you'll all like it, which is I'm going to share my screen. I have a study guide for today's stuff, and I'm going to share it in a bit of a different manner. And I hope that you will enjoy the new look. Okay, so let's just review what we did yesterday. We started with this very important law that we're going to deal with a lot for a while, which is this idea of doing a korban shelo lishma. Today, we're going to give it a term, shinoi kodesh, as opposed to shinoi balim. Shinoi kodesh is switching the kedusha from one sacrifice to another. Shinoi balim, and today we'll even talk about what if you switched it to not a korban at all, but you said I'm just going to slaughter it for the sake of slaughtering an animal to eat. And shinoi balim is they have intent for a different owner. That's also a disqualification. It was my korban, and the Kohen slaughtered it thinking it was for somebody else. Also disqualifies it, but we're going to learn about some differences. So that was the first halacha that we had in our Mishna, where we basically say the korban is kasher. However, it didn't work for the Baalim. And then we said, except for some exceptions to the rule. And one of the main exceptions, which we're going to deal with today, is a sin offering. Also the Pesach, Bismano, and then some people said the Asham, and there were some other different opinions. But the mainstream opinion is the first one, which is Pesach, when it's the day of Pesach, where the korban Pesach is supposed to be brought on the 14th in the afternoon, or maybe even in the morning, and the sin offering. Those are disqualified completely. Then we went to first question, why is this word Ella? And that we dealt with. The next question we had, which we were kind of in the middle of, we resolved, but if you remember, it started off with Ravina said to Rav Papa, you missed all the action in the Beit Midrash yesterday when Rava came in and raised this great contradiction between the lo lishma, between the stam. What about a korban that was done stam without any intent at all? He says it's good, but in get, it doesn't work. And why is that? And he resolves the contradiction. And he says, right, there's a difference between the two. Then the Gemara wanted to know, okay, firstly, how do we know that in a korban it doesn't have to be lishma? So we tried a bunch of options. We eventually had the Tanai Beitin that the Beitin recommended to everyone. Better off, right? Less is more. Better off not doing it lishma at all, l'shem anything, because you might accidentally mess it up once you do it in the name of something. Then we had started the end of the daf with how do we know that get has to be lishma and that stam doesn't work? Lishma and get is different, as we said, from the lishma and korbanot, because korbanot can be done without any intent at all. It's only when you mess up the intent that you can, do the wrong intent, it can mess it up. But without any intent, it works. Where get, it doesn't work that way. The get has to be written specifically in the name of this woman, and we learned this already in Masechet Gittin, so we know. But right now, the Gemara is going to have 5 attempts to prove it. Okay, so now I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share it a little differently. Hope you like it. Okay, here's the share screen. So now we're going to use the study guide in the background for the rest of the daf, and we're going to see the structure of today's daf. So the first question is, get stama pasul minan. Where do we get that baget is pasul? Okay, for those whose Hebrew isn't good, sorry that the study guides are only in Hebrew. It's not so easily doable to do them in English, but it will hopefully at least help you see the structure, even if you don't understand all the words. Okay, Ditnan, and obviously I'll be translating, so you won't have to worry. So the first Mishnah we read yesterday, I'm not going to review the whole thing, but you're in the shuk and you hear a sofer calling out, so-and-so, divorce so-and-so, and he's just reading his document. You say, that's me, and anyway, I wanted to divorce my wife. Hopefully it wasn't like the power of suggestion, and the guy said, good idea, I'll divorce my wife. But assuming, right, he was planning to divorce her, and he said, let me just use that get. Well, pasula gareshbo. It doesn't work because it wasn't lishma. But in the end, we said, no, that could be like Rav Papa. Because Rav Papa said that's just because they didn't even write the whole get for the intent of a get. They were just practicing. They were writing practice documents that you at least need intent. You might not need intent. Now you do, but you can't infer from here, you might not need intent for the woman, but you definitely need intent that it be written as a divorce document. And this was just a practice document, not meant to be used at all for a get. So that's at least a way to say, no, in the end, it is the case that you need to be lishma, but we have no way to prove it from here. So we move on. Elameha, the last two words of daf bet, I'm a bet, elameha. We can learn it from here. And these are all Mishnayot in Gittin. Yeter came. In addition to that, here's another case. Now, these cases are kind of absurd cases. They're more likely just theoretical, but they're trying to get to an idea. Yeter came. Katav l'garesh d'ishto v'nimlach. Okay, so we have another case where a man decides to divorce his wife, writes up a get, and then decides, you know what, I'm not going to divorce her. Mitzel Beniro, one of the people in his city, happens to find him, Va'amarlo, and says to him, you know, I heard you were going to divorce your wife. I see you have this document. And lo and behold, Shmi Kashimcha, Shem Ishtika Shem Ishtecha, my name is like your name. My wife's name is the exact same name as your wife. Pasula Gareshbo, right? And he obviously wants to use the get that's already written, right? He could save money, maybe get half price. You know, the guy's willing to sell it to him or maybe even give it to him. Well, because remember, they had to go to a sofer to write it up. It wasn't so easy, even nowadays, right? You need a sofer to write it up. Pasula Gareshbo. You cannot use that. So here you have it. It wasn't written l'shem ha'isha. This looks like a good, perfect proof, except that I told you that we're going to have 5 attempts till we actually succeed. So they're obviously going to reject this, to which they say, Dil mashane hatam de intikle l'shem gerushin dahahu. This is different. Stam maybe would work. This is worse than stam. Why is this worse than stam? Because it was intended for a particular person. And now intik means it got disconnected. In other words, it got disconnected from gerushin of that person. That already makes it much worse than stam. Okay, if it was just written stam for the name of some woman and man without anyone in particular in mind, maybe that would work. But this was written, right? Like maybe someone wrote it thinking maybe I'll find, you know, and if you remember Gittin, it was always like Yosef and Shimon, and, you know, divorce is like a very classic name. And he wrote it thinking, you know, it's like when you go into a store and they have all those things with your name, you could buy like a keychain, you know, they just like have a lot, figuring there's a lot of people with those names. So maybe that would work. This one kind of got uprooted from its original intent. That might make it worse. Okay, yetro, okay, getting to more absurd cases. Yesh lo shtei nashim sheshmotehan shavot. We have a man who's married to 2 women with the same name. Okay, you can imagine the confusion that would cause in the household, but forgetting about that. Katav l'garesha tagdola, maybe couldn't take it anymore, so he decides to divorce the older one. Lo yigaresh bo et haktana. Now, if he decides to divorce the older one and then decides, you know what, I actually want to divorce the other woman. Okay, again, a very hard situation to imagine from a real perspective. But instead of divorcing the older one, he decides to divorce the younger one. But lo and behold, they have the same name. He wrote it for both of them. That should work. But no, he can't do that. Okay, so this doesn't work. Why not? We think because stama lishma, right? Stama lishma. But this is the same as the previous case. So the Gemara rejects it in the same way. Right? This one was supposed to be for the older one. And then he decides not to use it. So that already ruins it because now we're switching it from one to the other. But if it wasn't intended for anyone in particular, maybe it would work. That brings us to the next case. Okay, if you want more absurd. If he says to the sofer, Ktov, listen, I have 2 wives with the same name. Okay, both of them are named Rivka. And garesh. Okay, so just write Rivka. I'll figure out when I get to it, you know, which one of them I want to divorce. That's why it's a little absurd. You know, he just knows he wants to divorce one, doesn't know which one yet. Pasul legareshbo. Okay, he cannot use this get. Now here, that's a good case of stam, right? Because it was written really stam. Well, not really, the Gemara says, because dil mashane hatam de aim brera. Okay, what's brera? Remember, we've learned brera many times. For those who this is not new to you. So brera means that I can come now and basically say that what was, right, what I left open back then, I can decide on it now, and it can be as if it was back then. Now, that would work perfectly in this case if you say there's brera, because right, he leaves it open at the beginning. He decides at the end. It's as if retroactively it had worked, and then it was as if it was written l'shma. But here, we could say that maybe the person who wrote this, the reason why it doesn't work is specifically because they hold we don't go by brera. We don't use the laws of brera. It's not valid. Now, Rashi adds this other point here that it's gria mistam. Okay, so just like all the other cases, it's worse than stam. Why? Because shema b'sha'at, like what does it mean, ain brera? Why can't we later say that when we decide later, it's as if retroactively it was good, that it was what we meant earlier? Because maybe lo haya b'da'ato shabal lezo v'intek l'shem ha'acheret. Maybe he really did know at the time who he wanted, and maybe it was the other one, and now he decides it's that one. Well, it could be he really meant the other one originally, and he's changing his mind, and then it's just like the previous case. So if we hold ain brera, it's because it's possible he really did already know, and then obviously switch later, and that would be a problem, as in the previous. So that doesn't, and that would make it worse than stam because it was intended for one and then switches to the other. But now we're finally at our final source before we move on to the next section of today's daf. Elameha, we'll learn it from here. Hakotev tofse Gittin. Here we have someone who writes forms, get forms, okay, like the ktuba we talked about. So according to this, by the way, you could do it, okay? We don't do it, as far as I know. We don't do this kind of thing. But it seems like from the Mishnah you could. Hakotev tofse Gittin. If you write a tofes, right, like fill in the blank, like a ktuba that you would find, right? Some people write ktubas from the beginning, but often you just get a form document and you fill in the blanks. So if a sofer wrote tofse Gittin, sarich sheyaniach makom ha'ish, this is really a Mishnah for the sofrim. Sarich sheyaniach makom ha'ish, makom ha'isha, makom ha'edim, makom hazman. So you have to leave blank certain things: the name of the man, the name of the woman, the name of the witness, the place where the witnesses are from, and makom ha'edim and makom hazman. Okay, and the makom hazman, I guess it means the makom that it's written, and the makom and the zman, okay, and the time, the date. Okay, the main part of the get is the words. You are now permitted to everyone, because that's what a get does. It permits the woman to marry anyone. Also, those words have to be written lishma. So what do you see here? That you can't write a get stam. Now, the tofes part, some of the words you could, but other parts of it, like, for example, the woman's name, which is what we were looking for, and the man's name, you can't write it stam. You can't fill that in without actually having a particular man or woman in mind. So what do you see here? Get distama is pasul. And there it's very clear, because this is someone just writing it for no particular intent of a person, which is what we said about most of the other cases. And therefore, this would be our proof. Okay. Next part of today's daf, I'm going to quickly scroll down the document, and you're going to see on the study guide and see what's here. Oh, I want to mention to anyone looking on the site for the study guide, because we have a new site and it's a little bit different. So if you look on the site for the study guide, you'll find it at the top where it says the title, Zevachim 3. At the top, you can always find, I think I mentioned this yesterday, the introduction to the Masechet. It's going to be found on every daf of the Masechet, and that's true for all now the dapim on our site, at least once from somewhere in the middle of Moed where the introduction started. You can find Ayelet's introductions on the Masechet, and you can find the study guides when there's a study guide. That's where it's going to appear at the top there. Okay. So now what we're going to do in this part of today's daf is we're going to bring 4 contradictions. So it all started with the contradiction from yesterday. Okay, here I called it the first contradiction because these 4 contradictions are going to be specifically about something Rav said. Okay, the first 2 are quoting a statement that Rav Yehuda quoted Rav as saying, and one contradicts a Mishna, one contradicts a Braita. The third contradiction is going to be Rav to Rav. Okay, something Rav said about Shinoi Kodesh and something he said about Shinoi Baalim. And the other is going to be Rav to a Braita, okay? The first 2 are brought by Rava, which really seems like it's a continued discussion of what Ravina said to Rav Papa, that, oh, you missed it when Rav brought these contradictions, and 1 was yesterday and 2 are today. And then we have 2 more contradictions between Rav and a Braita, or Rav and himself. 1 Rav Yosef brings and 1 Rav Chaviva brings, okay? And we're going to resolve all the contradictions. You can see also from the study guide that the first, the third, and the fourth are pretty easy resolutions. The third one is going to get a little bit complicated, okay? We're going to have a very easy solution, but then we're going to say it only works according to one opinion, and then we're going to have to explain the other opinion. So that's a bit of a preview of what we're going to do now. So here goes. And they all have to do with some sort of disqualification of a korban, but which is going to get to a bigger, broader idea. And then we're going to compare that to, other than one of the cases, to some other halacha completely, and a different area. The first one, get, the second one, impurity, and compare how this principle works in both cases. Tu Rame Milta Achrita. So in it again, or in addition, he brought up another contradiction. This is Rav. Mi Amar Rav Yehuda, Rav Yehuda say in the name of Rav the following statement, meaning how could he have said it? Because it contradicts a Mishnah. Chatat shachata l'shem ola psula, shachata l'shem chulin kshera. Okay, this is a very interesting halacha. So a chatat that is slaughtered in the name of an ola, that's our Mishnah, classic our Mishnah. Psula, we know it's disqualified. Why is it disqualified? That's what we said. A chatat that is done shelo lishma, meaning it was done for the purposes of an ola, for example, is disqualified. Now, if you slaughter it though, with the intent that you're just going to eat the animal, right? And it's just chulin, meaning it's not for the purposes of a sacrifice at all, it's actually kshera. It's fine. So a chatat that's slaughtered for the sake of nothing really, right? For just eating is actually fine. Why? Well, comes the Gemara, and these words are going to come up a lot. So try to get them clear in your head what they mean. Dimina machriba. This is going to be in all four of the contradictions. They're all based on this principle. Dimina machriba, delav mina lo machriba. If it's the same type, it ruins it. Machriv, churban, destruction. If it's the same type, it destroys it. Okay, meaning you have a chatat and an ola, those are similar types, kodshim, kodshim. If you're keeping it within the same type, but changing it, right, from a chatat to an ola, obviously it's different, you can ruin something. But if it's completely different, lav mina, it's so different that lo machriba. You can see the logic here. I mean, it's a little counterintuitive. You would think, oh, well, it's close enough, maybe it works. No, the opposite. If it's close but off, right, similar but a little different, it ruins it. But if it's so completely different, like kodshim, chulin, it actually doesn't ruin it because it's so far off that it doesn't mess it up. And that's this principle. Now we're going to move to get. And we're going to see that this principle is not the same. Okay? So now they're going to say urimini. That contradicts by Gittin. So again, we're doing the comparison to get. Kol get shenichtav shelo l'shem isha pasul. Va'afilu l'shem goya nami pasul. If it's written not for the name of this woman, it's disqualified. And even if you write it in the name of even if it's in the non-Jewish woman, it's also pasul. Okay, now you would think a non-Jewish woman is so different that it wouldn't ruin it, according to this principle. But you see, it does ruin it. So that goes against what we said. Shachata l'shem chulin should be comparable to, they wrote a get for the name of a non-Jewish woman. Now, why is a non-Jewish woman so different? Not because Jews and non-Jews are different, but for the very simple reason that there's no Gittin and Kiddushin for non-Jewish people. Okay, it's not a realm that they don't get gets and kiddushin, right? It's not something that has a comparable, right? There, they don't have a get, they don't have a kiddushin. So the whole concept of get kiddushin doesn't apply to them. So it would be something completely so out there. It's like taking a sacrifice and doing it l'shem chulin. And yet, in our case, it works in the shchita l'shem chulin, and in the get case, it disqualifies it. To which the Gemara answers an obvious answer based on yesterday's sugya, which is no, that's not right. Based on what we said yesterday, okay, shane means, and he resolved the contradiction. We're going to see that word over and over today, because every time we have a contradiction, we're going to say vishane, and he resolved it. Get, if you take a get, dal means get rid of, dal goyamine, havale stama, ustama pasul. By get, if you get rid of, let's say it wasn't l'shem goya. Let's say it was l'shem nobody. Okay, just put a name. Well, that's stama, right? And what do we say about a get as opposed to kodshim? Stam get is disqualified. But kodshim, dal chulin mine, if you didn't have the chulin, you didn't do it l'shem chulin, you just did it for no reason. Havale stama, right? You slaughtered it without any intent in your head. Ustama ksherim, right? We know that stama are ksherim. So what do you see here? The reason why there's a difference in these two cases has nothing to do with, right? You could say, Shachta l'shem chulin is kshera because lav mina lo machriv ba, right? But by get, it's different because even if you say lav mina doesn't destroy it, so okay, where does that put it? It puts it in the realm of stam. It definitely wasn't written for that woman, so it was written for nobody. Well, if it's written for nobody, it's not going to work no matter what. Having nothing to do with our topic, right? Having nothing to do with this comparison, and therefore it doesn't teach you. It's not a contradiction to this principle of lav mina lo machriv ba. If it's not the same type, it doesn't ruin it. Had nothing to do with it. Okay. contradiction number one resolved. Contradiction number two. Okay. Virama milta achrite. So we brought up further contradiction. Okay. Here's our second contradiction. It's going to start off the same. Mi amar Rav Yehuda, Amarav. Didn't Rav Yehuda say in the name of Rav exactly this law we just saw? Chatat shechata l'shem ola psula, shechata l'shem chulin kshira. Okay, so if it's done l'shem ola, it's disqualified. If it's done for chulin, it's fine. Now, Alma, what do we learn from this? The same thing we learned the first time. Dimina machriva. I'm going to repeat again what this means. If it's the same type, it ruins it. In other words, again, it's the same but different, ola instead of chatat, that can ruin it. But if it's so completely different, chulin, lav mina, it's not at all similar, lo machriba, it doesn't destroy it. Okay, v'hatanya. Now, doesn't it say in a braita? Now, for this, we have to go. I'm going to scroll down to the very bottom of the study guide, and I brought the pasuk there. In Vayikra Yud Aleph Lamed Gimel, it talks about impurity of vessels. Now, there's different laws for different types of vessels. So, kli cheres, an earthenware vessel, has a unique halacha that's not true for any other kli. Okay, kol kli cheres asher yipol mehem el tocho. If, let's say, a sheretz, a dead, creepy crawler creature, falls into the airspace of the earthenware vessel without touching it. Okay, most vessels become impure by touching. And let's say it's a metal kli, for example, gabo, like if it touches the outside, then what's inside becomes impure. But a kli cheres, that's not the case. A kli cheres, only if it falls in the airspace of the vessel, and again, this could be like a sheretz hanging in the air, okay, would then make the vessel impure, which actually it doesn't say in the pasuk, but it says asher yipol mehem el tocho, until the inside, into the inside of it. Kol asher b'tocho yitma v'oto tishboru. Okay, so now whatever's in this vessel becomes impure. Meaning, if let's say I have a bowl with food in it, and into the airspace without touching anything, into the airspace of that vessel comes this sheretz, then the food becomes impure, right? And the vessel becomes impure, right? The vessel's going to become impure. It's going to be a rishon. And then that makes all the food impure, which is just sheni. So everything becomes impure in this vessel. Okay, that's the basics. Now, it says here, okay, we'll go back up, tocho. Okay, so now we're going to bring this bright down. Tocho, the inside, what's inside this? Velo toch tocho. What does that mean? Well, let's say inside that earthenware vessel, I have another earthenware vessel where the top of that earthenware vessel, so I have, let's say, a bowl inside a bowl, okay? That bowl that's inside the other bowl, if the height of it, okay, if the height of it is lower than the other bowl, then everything's impure in that second bowl as well. But if the height of that second bowl is at least the same height as the other vessel, and all the more so if it's taller than the other vessel, like let's say you put a vase inside a bowl, okay? A tall vase is inside the bowl. They're both earthenware. That vessel is what we call a chatzitza. It breaks. So if, okay, so you have your tall vase inside this wide bowl, and inside the bowl, the airspace of the bowl, not the vase, inside the airspace of the bowl falls this creepy crawler creature, then what's in the vase is protected. Tocho will be, the inside of the vessel will be a problem, but not toch tocho, not a vessel in a vessel. Okay, that's the first basic halacha. Now comes the key line. Va'afilu kli shetef matzil. Now, what's kli shetef? That's a different kind of vessel, not earthenware. It's not just if it's earthenware. What they're saying is if it's metal, if it's wood, same thing. Matzil means protects it from impurity. Okay, so what's inside that inner vessel, whatever the kli is made out of, is going to be protected. Okay, now creates what we call a chatzitza, a barrier. Okay, now what does this have to do with our topic? Well, the issue is, now the Gemara doesn't tell you this, so you have to kind of put more things together. The assumption here is that a kli cheres and a kli shetef are not the same type, okay? Now, what do you see here? They're not the same type because they have completely different laws of impurity, even though they're both vessels. If they're not the same type, then let's go. Lav mina, basically. Now, what does this have to do with destruction? Well, lav mina machrifa. What does it destroy? Now, it's a little tricky to understand this, but because it's actually a good thing. It protects from impurity. But the fact that it creates a barrier means it's destroying, because what's it doing? It's breaking from the other vessel. So two completely different things, this kli shetef and kli cheres, right, The kli shetef blocks the impurity. So it's not the same type, and yet it's machrif. Okay, it destroys, meaning again, destroy here is translated as it breaks the tumah. Okay, that's kind of destruction. It breaks it. Now, obviously, it's protective, it's good, but it's breaking the tumah. So we have a contradiction. On our side, we said it doesn't destroy anything because it's so completely different. Here, it's so completely different, and yet it does destroy. Okay, it creates this barrier. So the Gemara is going to answer Vishane, but Rava really resolved this contradiction. How so? Okay, now they don't say the main thing, so I'm going to add those words first. Okay, what they're really going to say, and the basis of their answer is kind of missing from the words here, but you'll see in a minute how they do it. A kli shetef and a kli cheres are not so different. In the end, they're both vessels. Okay, that is mina, which means demina mahriba, which matches exactly what Rav said. Same type destroys. Chatat l'shem ola is like kli shetef inside a kli cheres, because kli korban korban, just different type of kli, different type of korban. Okay, that makes sense. So how do they say this? Well, they say instead compare it to something else. Okay. We'll make a different analogy. Chulin to kachim is not like kli shetef to kli cheres. It's really, right? Ola to chatat is like shetef to cheres. Asil chulin etzel kachim kimachitza etzel tanur. It's more like a barrier inside the kli. If you put up a machitza in the middle of this vessel, okay, you hung some sort of contraption that blocks, right, that breaks this in two. Now, a tanur, we don't think of a tanur as this, but they're tanurim, their ovens were earthenware vessels. So what they're saying is a barrier in an earthenware vessel would be more the same as chulin and kachim, because a machitza is not a vessel. A machitza is a barrier. That's not a vessel. A vessel and a vessel, fine, they have different laws, but they're vessels and vessel. But right, a vase inside a bowl. But a barrier that you stick inside the vessel, that's completely different. Now, let's see the rules about a machitza. And here's where it's going to get complicated, because we're going to see that a machitza by a tanur doesn't block, and that's going to prove our point, okay? Because it's not the same type and it doesn't destroy, meaning it doesn't create a chatzitza. But that's only according to the rabbis. And then we're going to have to figure out what about the other opinion that disagrees. How are we going to explain it? But let's start with the first. That's very easy. So, ma machitza etzel tanur lo mahangele klal. A machitza in a tanur doesn't help at all. What does it mean it doesn't help? It means that if a sheretz falls into the oven, and even though there's a barrier and it only falls on the left side, what's on the right side is impure as well. Okay? It doesn't create a barrier at all. And just like that, same thing for chulin with kachim, right? This one doesn't ruin, this one doesn't block. It's all the same because they're not the same types. Okay, very nice. But let's see where we have the source for this. How do we know? It's none. And that's where we're going to see there's a machloket, and then we're going to go back and say, well, this works very well according to the rabbis. What about Rabbi Eliezer? Tanur shechatzitzot b'nistarim o b'yiriyot. This is exactly what we said. Okay, you have an oven, and you blocked off one half. You split it up by putting a wooden board in or a curtain. V'nimtza sheretz b'makom echad, and there's a sheretz on one side. Hakol tameh, the whole thing is impure. Or likewise, you have something else, which again, it's not going to be a kli. Why? This is a kli called a kaveret. It's not really a kaveret. A kaveret is a beehive. But what they mean is we have a beehive, or sorry, we have something that's like a beehive. Okay, we have a basket that's like with holes and it's pchuta, it's broken, it has a hole in it. Upkuka b'kash, and you put like a straw to stop the hole. But well, basically, we're going to say since it has a hole, even right, it's not a kli anymore. Okay, so again, this is like a machitza because it's not a kli. Umishoshelet lavir tanur, and it's hanging kind of in the airspace of the tanur. Sheretz b'tochav, there's a sheretz in that vessel, even though it's not really a vessel. Hatanur, or because it's not a vessel, hatanur tameh. Basically, we view this as all one thing because it's not a vessel in a vessel because this isn't a vessel. So if the sheretz is in that kaveret, right, that vessel that looks like a kaveret, right, and is a little bit broken, the whole tanur becomes impure. Sheretz b'tanur, what if there's a sheretz in the tanur? Well, ochlin shebitochat meim, and the reverse. Everything in that kaveret will be impure. And likewise on the other side of the tanur, if there's a machitza. The Rabbi Eliezer mitaher. Now, Rabbi Eliezer, again, so right now we're not going to focus on Rabbi Eliezer. The point is, already we have our answer. Just like the tanur, the mechitza doesn't block, likewise our case. But why does Rabbi Eliezer mitaher? Amar Rabbi Eliezer, kavachomer. I'll give you a simple kavachomer argument. Im hitzil b'meit hachamor lo tatzil b'kli cheres hakav. He says, okay, now, if you have a house and you have a dead body in the house, everything in the house is impure. Or if you have a tent, everything in the tent is impure. But if you separated that room with a mechitza that goes up to the ceiling, and you have a dead body on one side of the mechitza, it's not going to go to the other side. That's a basic law of Tumat Oel. Okay? So if a mechitza protects in a case of impurity of a dead, which is much more severe because you have to take 7 days to get over that impurity, whereas a sheretz, you go to the mikveh that day and by nighttime you're fine. Lo tatzil b'kli cheres hakal, right? The laws of kli cheres are much more lenient. So wouldn't you think it would work to protect it? So there's a kavachomer where he says, obviously this mechitza is going to block in the sheretz case. Amru lo, they said to him, turning out to Amabet, lo, no, that's not true. We don't believe we don't accept your kavachomer because it doesn't make any sense what you're saying. Because in mitzil bebeit chamor, why does it block in a house? Sheken chalukav oalim, because in an oel mechitzas work, right? In a house, you want to split one room into two, you put a wall in the middle and you blocked it, right? Even if it's not a real wall, but it's a temporary wall. That works in houses. But think about earthenware vessels. Do you put mechitzas in earthenware vessels? No. There's no such concept of blocking off a kli cheres with a mechitza. People don't do that. So that's why the mechitza has significance. And in oel and tumat it doesn't have it in kli cheres. And that's what they had to go against this kavachomer. Anyway, that was just this Mishna. So now the Gemara, what they want to do is say, okay, what I kept telling you, which is, we resolve the contradiction between the chatat l'shem ola and the chatat l'shem chulin compared to the kli shetef, kli cheres, where we thought it was the same type. We thought it was different types by saying, oh no, that's the same type. Better compare it to the mechitza case. When the mechitza case doesn't work and the chulin etzakojim doesn't work, meaning it doesn't ruin. Okay, and then we have the same thing. But it does ruin according to Rabbi Eliezer. So how are you going to explain the chulin etzakojim when the mechitza etzel tanur actually does block? Okay, so now hatinach leRabbanan leRabbi Eliezer ma'ikal amemer. So how are we going to explain Rabbi Eliezer? So for this, we go to the next chart on the top of the second side of the page. Okay, so now they're going to explain. Rabbi Eliezer kavachomer kamal. Okay, what this means, again, there's a lot of words missing in this Gemara, like usual. Okay, they expect you to understand everything, which is Rabbi Eliezer could say, I agree with Rav. Shachata l'shem chulin kshera. Okay, you slaughter it l'shem chulin, it's fine. Why specifically with the mechitza case is it different, right? In other words, I agree with this concept. Let's say it even better. I agree that lav mina lo machriv ba. Okay, I think if you take two completely different things, it really doesn't ruin it. What about the mechitza? Well, theoretically, the mechitza is totally completely different than the kli cheres, and it shouldn't be a chatzitza. But there's a kavachomer. The kavachomer overrides the law. Okay. Right, remember the kavachomer. If it works in a make case, obviously it's going to work in a kli cheres case. So he says the kavachomer overrides. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute. If the kavachomer can override the law in the case of the kli cheres, then why don't we say the same thing? And now you might have been thinking this when I read it, rather in the beginning. If not, think about it now. In the shachata l'shem chulin case, I slaughter this animal, not for the sake of a korban. I slaughter it for the sake of nothing, right? Like I want to eat the meat. It's good. Wouldn't a kavachomer say the opposite? Kodshim mechalalim kodshim chulin lo koshaken. Right? If I do this for an ola, it's going to destroy the korban completely. But if I do it for a chulin, right? Wouldn't you say kodshim is better, right, than doing it for a non-sacred purpose at all? So if you think a kavachomer could override this principle of lav mina lo machriba, if you do something completely different, it doesn't ruin it. But not if you have a kavachomer. So let's make a kavachomer here. And then we should say that actually the chulin should destroy it completely. You're in the temple, you're slaughtering an animal for the sake of a regular korban. It's not going to for just eating it for whole. That's not going to destroy it, right? All the more so it should be destroyed. So that kind of ruins our idea that the kavachomer overrode the law, because the kavachomer should override the law here as well. So they say, no, we're going to explain it like this. Elatama de Rav. Let's explain the reason for Rav. Again, according to using Rabbi Eliezer glasses, according to the way he reads the sugya. Ki Rabbi Elazar. Don't confuse Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer is a Tana, right? Rabbi Elazar is an Amora, student of Rabbi Yochanan. As Rabbi Elazar said, Da'ama Rabbi Elazar. My time of the Rav. What's the reason for Rav? It's not because Lav Mina lo Machriba, because that really could be overridden by a Kavachomer. But the Kavachomer is overridden by a Pasuk. Okay, so we have override, right? We start with a law, two overrides. We start with a law, we override it with a Kavachomer, but then we override the Kavachomer with a Pasuk. What's the Pasuk? V'lo yechalelu et kodshei b'nei Yisrael et asher yarimu laHashem. You shouldn't ruin the kodshim of Bnei Israel that they raise up to God. Now there's two mentions really of kodshim. There's kodshei Bnei Israel and there's asher yarimu. So what have they learned from this? How do you desecrate a sacrifice? Kodshim mechalalim kodshim ve'en chulim mechalalim kodshim. Okay, so basically a drasha from a pasuk, this law of Rav. And then it's not because lav mina lo machriba, because that really could be overridden by a chavachomer. Now, it's true that lav mina lo machriba, two of a different type don't destroy each other, but not here. Here, it's overridden by a kavachomer, because if kodshim mechalim kodshim, all the more so chulin should. But there's a pasuk that overrides the kavachomer, and then we're good. But what do they say? Wait a minute. According to this, Alma Atakraf came in Kavachomer. What you just proved is a pasuk can override a Kavachomer, right? Well, Hachanami Leite Tocho Lav came in Kavachomer. Why don't we then use the law of Tocho to override the Kavachomer in the law of the other one and say basically the Tocho will come to say, okay, so now where were we? We had the case of Machitza and we said Mitzil b'meir hachamor lo tatzil b'kli cheres hachakal. But then we can say Tocho and not Tocho, and maybe Tocho is only for Kli Cheres or Kli Shetef also, but not for Machitza. And then we could say that Pasuk overrides the Kal V'chomer, and then we would say that the Machitza doesn't, and that goes against Rabbi Eliezer, because he said the Machitza does work to block it. So if we're going to have, again, this is all Kal V'chomer override Lav Mina Lo Machriba, but then a Pasuk can override that, but it doesn't. So if you're holding Pasuk on this side works to override the Kal V'chomer, to override the law, it should work on the other side as well, to which they have a very simple answer. Hi Tocho mebayele for something else. He doesn't darshan the Tocho here because the Tocho pasuk he uses for a different drasha. And then we'll say the rabbis say, oh, this halacha we're going to explain doesn't even need a pasuk. That's where we're going to end this section. So what is it needed for? And this is like the classic. What if we talk about, let's say my hand touches something and that could make it impure. What if I have a glove on my hand, right? What happens? So that's this is like a glove. I want you to imagine it like that. This word tocho is used for the following drasha. If I have food that I put around it, teat, like clay or something like that, it's surrounded by something else. So it's like a glove on the food, okay? And the food goes into ichnisan la'avir tanur. It goes into the airspace of the tanur. Now, what does it say in the pasuk? Tocho is going to be a problem, like food that's inside. So tocho is coming to include this kind of food as well. Because you might have thought, if I touch that food, it wouldn't be impure because I'm not actually touching the food. I'm touching the glove that's on the food or the clay that's surrounding the food. But avironami lo mitamu. Maybe if it goes into the airspace of the clay, it won't be impure either because it's got some protection over it. Kamash malan tocho is coming to teach you it's still forbidden. It's still impure. And then tocho is used for that and not to override the kavachomer. And that's why in the end, he's left with the kavachomer, even though you could have a kavachomer on the other side as well, but the pasuk overrides the kavachomer on the other side. It just doesn't override it here. And what about the rabbis? Why don't they use tocho for this drasha? Hanach lo tzrichei kra. Okay, you don't need a pasuk for that. Okay, we end that sugya. That was all the second contradiction, which was very easily resolved according to the rabbis, but was not right by saying chulin to kodshim is like mechitza to tanur and not kli shetef to kli cheres, because kli shetef and kli cheres are actually still the same type, even though they're different. They're close enough to be the same type, more like ola and chatat. But chulin to kodshim is like mechitza itzel tanur, which doesn't create a chatzitza, and then it works perfectly. But according to Rabbi Eliezer, according to Rabbi Eliezer, it does create a chatzitza. So how do we resolve that? He has a kavachomer that overrides it, but he really does agree in principle with the law. Okay. Third contradiction. Rabbi Yosef bar Ami Rami. He brings a contradiction from something else. And here we're going to quote it different. Until now, we had two statements. It was the same statement that Rabbi Yehuda said in Rav. Name of Rav, two different contradictions for that statement. Now we get to a different statement, and what he did was he took a contradiction from Shinoi Kodesh to Shinoi Baalin, which are both ways that you can mess something up with intent. as I mentioned earlier today, either switching the korban or switching the person who it's supposed to be for. Mishan umishani, and he resolves it. So here goes what he says. Mi amar Rav. Now, didn't Rav say, chatat sheshachta l'shem chatat kshera? If I'm supposed to bring a chatat because I ate chalev, and when the Kohen or whoever slaughtered it, had in mind that they were slaughtering it because I ate blood. So it's for the same korban, but a different reason for bringing the chatat. It's kshera. Okay, this, by the way, is the opposite of what we said before. Demina lo machriv ba. I told you really have to understand this concept to understand today's talk. Similar types doesn't ruin it. Right before we said similar types actually ruin it. And that's what we're going to see in the contradiction. L'shem ola psula. But if someone does it l'shem ola, that's the same law we saw before, right? If you do it l'shem ola, it's psula. But in this case, ola is actually lav mina, because comparatively, before ola was better than chulin, because chulin was the lav mina and the ola was the mina. In this case, ola is not the mean because it's compared to the chatat. Chatat is the same type, chatat to chatat. Chatat to ola is a different type. So what do you see? A different type actually ruins it. It's psula. So alma de lav mina machriba de mina lo machriba. Okay, that's what I explained. V'hama Rav, but doesn't Rav say about shinoi balim? Chatat sheshachta al misha mechuyav chatat is psula. So if you're bringing my korban chatat and you slaughter it with the intent that it's for someone else who owes a chatat, it's disqualified. Okay, that's bar mina. It's the same type, ruins it. So that's the opposite of what we just said. And chatat sheshachta al misha mechuyav ola kshera. But if you do shinoi balim and you switch it completely, right? You switch it also who it's for and also which korban it's for, it's actually kshera. And what do you see there? Lav mina, it's so completely different that it doesn't ruin it, right? So this theory on the second one goes with what we saw earlier. The one on the first doesn't go with what we saw earlier at all. It completely contradicts. But we don't care about what we saw earlier. The point is these two statements of Rav contradict each other. So again, Alma, from the second case, you see bar mina machriba, la bar mina lo machriba. Umishane. But how's he going to answer this? Each of these laws is going to be derived from a pasuk, not from this principle of mina machriv or lo machriv. Okay? They're all derived from psukim, each one. And that's how we're going to resolve it. Hatam, v'shachat ota lechatat amarachman. The pasuk says, you slaughter it for a chatat. What do you learn from this? It doesn't matter what chatat. Okay? It doesn't matter if it's for the wrong korban. Chatat l'shem chatat nishchata. And in the end, it was slaughtered as a chatat. So it's good. Okay? So you messed up on which chatat we were bringing it for, but it doesn't matter. And hacha, when we say about shinoi balim, the whole shinoi balim is learned from the following pasuk: v'chiper alav, and it atones for him and not someone else. So what does that mean? Chiper alav, k'tiv, what's the drasha? Alav v'lo chavero, right, on him and not on his friend. But it has to be, in order for this disqualification to kick in, that's not going to work, shinoi balim, chavero dumia didei, the friend has to be like him, meaning, shemuchuyav kapara k'moto, has to be for someone, and if I was supposed to bring a chatat, and you were supposed to bring an olam. When the person who slaughters it intending to be for you and your ola, that's so completely different, right? It doesn't fit under kippur alav. It has to be someone. If you did it for someone else who's obligated the same korban, you did it for someone who's chayav a chatat, then it would disqualify it. Shinoi balim, but shinoi balim is not, and that's all I'll learn from this word alav. Alav has to be like him but different. Okay, and that's when it would ruin it. Okay, last contradiction for today. Rav Chaviva Rami. Rav Chaviva now brings the contradiction. Again, Rav against a Braita. And here we're going to go back to a Braita we saw earlier. Number 2. Okay, the contradiction number 2. So he was Rami Shinoi Balim Atoch Tocho. Okay, he contradicted what Rav said about Shinoi Balim, which was the second one in Rav's statement in the previous, to Tocho. Okay, let's see. So how so? It's going to be very simple. Because bar mina machriba, right? If it's the same person's, it's a different person, same korban, that's the same type, ruins it. Someone who's completely different, the ola is kshera. So this is exactly like the second contradiction, because it's the same conclusion as in the second contradiction. When you talk about the chatat l'shem ola, chatat l'shem chulin, right? La bar mina was lo machriba, and that contradicted tocho, which again, we're going by the original, which is what we thought at the first point, which is if you look at the bright of tocho, lo toch tocho, if you look please shetef matzil, Originally, what did we say? Kli shetev is completely different than a kli cheres. They have completely different laws. So what do you see? Lav mina, they're not the same type, and it's machriba. To which we answer, right? So again, let's just read it inside. Did Rav really say chatat shechatan mish mechuyav chatat psula mish mechuyav olak shera alma demina machriba? The same type ruins it. Lav mina lo machriba. Different type doesn't destroy anything. V'hatanya tocho v'lo toch tocho afilu kli shetev matzil, which again means no, not the same type at all, and yet it destroys it. So, Mishane, they say the following. Arba tocho ktive. There's 4 times it says tocho in the pasuk, which is not true. It says tocho twice, but each tocho, when it says toch, tocho, toch, tocho, because it says tocho and not just toch. So it goes tocho, we view that as a combination of 2 words, toch and tocho. So we count each one twice. So we have 4. Each one is coming for something different, and the last one is relevant, and that's how we'll end today's daf. Had the gufo. One is coming to teach you the main law in this pasuk, which is kol asher b'tocho yitma. Everything in the pasuk is impure, meaning the food. Chad l'gzera shava. They do gzera shava from one to the other. Just like the food is tameh, also the kli becomes tameh. From again, this is all when something enters its airspace. Chad tocho shel zeh v'lo tocho shel achil. This only works for cheres, earthenware vessels. It doesn't work for metals, wood, anything else. And finally, idach tocho v'lo toch tocho v'afilu kli shetev matzil. This is what we learned earlier. It's a derivation from the pasuk. It has nothing to do with lav, mina, all that. It's derived from the pasuk. Right? We had 2 answers to this. One was it really is the same type, but the second answer was it's right according to Rabbi Eliezer. There's a pasuk. Tocho v'lo toch tocho afilu kli shetev matzil. Tocho is a problem, not toch tocho, and not only not toch tocho, even some other kind of vessel protects, right, from the tumah, from getting there. And that's just a drasha. And with that, we end with our resolution to the 4th contradiction. So today's daf is going to be very easy to review, especially with the study guide. The first question was, get stamid de pasul. Where do we get it from? We had 5 possibilities till we finally found the right Mishna that really taught that halacha, that a stam get doesn't work, right? A get that's written not really particularly the Shema Isha. So then we brought 4 contradictions, all related to statements of either Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav or Rav directly, talking about something that relates to korbanot, that relates to similar type and different types, and either says it actually, the more similar it is, the more just right, the more it could ruin it, the more different it is. It's not going to ruin it, or one of them we actually brought the complete opposite, okay? And how it contradicts either a Mishnah, a Braita, or Rav's statement himself. And each time we resolved the contradiction. The one that was a little more complicated was the one that had to be resolved according to 2 different opinions, both according to the rabbis and according to Rabbi Eliezer. And with that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day, and we should hear B'sorot Tovot B'karov.